made it just in time for the end of the year with about 20 minutes to spare. Damn, it's been a while. Gonna be honest with you, soldiers, it's been a miserable year for us. We basically had to stop development for like 3 months, war and real life bullshit just kept coming at us, but we're really trying to push ourselves forward for 2024 and hopefully kick it off with an awesome announcement. As you already saw by the thumbnail, we're ready to announce our first map, and not only announce it and interview the guy who made the map, who you should be familiar with considering you played on Normandy and Floodwaters and other awesome maps from Ace of Spades. We thought it would be an awesome opportunity to just interview the man himself and go through the process of what it was like to make the Boonies, the first official map for Born to Build, which, if everything goes fine during 2024, we should start playtesting and show you guys some gameplay footage within this map. So this devlog has been a long time in the making, required a lot of effort and tons of work, so you know the drill. Like, subscribe, all that bullshit. We'd really appreciate it if you watch all the way to the end. Leave a comment, let us know what you think, and believe me when I say we are so ready to put 2023 behind us. And here's to a happy new year, a good 2024 to all of you, and let's get on with the show, shall we? Welcome, this is really exciting. We have the lovely Mr. Influx here with us.
Hello.
When Grandy was visiting our studio here, and we discussed the idea of saying, hey, we always loved Influx's maps, and Normandy being a particular favorite of mine, which I've said numerous times already. And then I realized, and you told me, Grandy, that you have conspired behind my back and have actually discussed the options of making a map from Born to Build, which I was really flattered and excited to hear. So it felt like a case of the stars aligning.
Well, I mean, if it's going to be like an Ace of Spades successor, then I love making maps for Ace of Spades, so it just stands to reason that I would love to make a map for your game as well.
I mean, when I started making the devlogs, it was just me and Heyman, doing the 3D models and talking about our experiences. So if we hit the chord with you, it means that for us, it was a good sign that we were on the right path. Not to mention that we have, Grandy working with us as well.
Yeah.
It does increase the pressure as always, but that's the way that it's always with any kind of project. You get people on board. You don't want to disappoint anybody, not the people helping us, working with us, and not the people who eventually play this game. For me, it made me really giddy in a good way to just say our first official map, which we collectively called the Boonies. We've got Influx to make it, and it's something that I think we talked about it before we even started modeling. Yeah, so it's really exciting for us, and I think we can go through the process and ask you a few questions. I think my question before we even start just talking about the Boonies map is just how did you even get into making maps for Ace of Spades?
Well, I've always enjoyed creating for games that I enjoy playing. It started off really when I was maybe 12 or 13 with a game called Command & Conquer Generals that had a built-in map editor, and I enjoyed creating maps for that. Basically any game that I've been involved with quite heavily, I've always enjoyed giving back and creating, and it's something that I enjoy seeing other people playing the maps. I enjoy playing them myself, that sort of thing. So when I joined the Ace of Spades community and once map editing came out, I had an idea for what I wanted to do, but there wasn't really the tools at the time to do it. So I just paused that idea until Buildrama's map converter came out, and that's when I really was like, right, this is something I can do. I just sort of taught myself how to use the slab editor and how to use VoxEd, and from there I just developed the idea. I've always had an affinity for World War II, so that's why a lot of my maps have been, World War II inspired. So I just really took that idea of the Normandy hard drop, so I just sort of wanted that little core town and the hedgerows and that sort of stuff, and that Normandy thankfully struck a chord with the community, because I think if that hadn't been well received, I probably wouldn't have continued making any maps for it. So yeah, it sort of snowballed from there.
I think I saw that there's a recurring theme of churches, right?
Yeah, I'm inspired by World War II, which took place in Europe, which, there's a lot of churches around there, so it's sort of just a coincidence that a lot of the maps that I make involve churches, although for balance I have also created a mosque for the map Oasis as well, so it's not just a church thing, it's just a religious building thing, it seems.
There have been battles in Vietnam that happened around temples, so I think that we also played around with the idea of like, I think that was the original thing we both discussed, like,
Yeah.
he has the idea around churches, maybe we should just give him a temple map, but I think we wanted to go with something a bit more general to Vietnam.
Yeah, well, I mean, the sort of theory behind this map is that, in my mind, Vietnam is split into three main terrain. You've got the mountain region, you've got the jungles or rainforest, then you've got the low-lying farmland, so I would really want to get a flavour of each in the map, because with it being the first map for the game, I wanted players to be able to have an experience in all three different types of terrain.
Our checklist for the first map wasn't long. We just wanted it to be a good introduction to the setting of the game, to exactly what you said, that it's the combination of what Vietnam, resonates for you, what it resonates for me, and mostly for other players. I sent you some reference footage, and you came back to us with this sketch people could be able to see on screen right now. And I was wondering, was the first maps that you did before also start with the sketch?
Normandy wasn't, the map that came after that wasn't, but really Market Garden was the first one that I started with a sketch, because I knew that was going to be quite a detailed map. I was sort of finding my feet a little bit with Normandy and the one after that, which nobody really knew about. Yeah, like that's sort of part of the process that I've created for myself, create a sketch and then use that as a basis, and I think it works out really handy, especially when you're working collaboratively with other people. It really gives the idea of how the map's going to develop across.
Yeah, absolutely. It gave us a good feel for it, and I think it was like we both looked at it and like, yeah, sure, yeah, we like it. So yeah, after the sketch, it brought us to the next stage. So you started with the color map or the noise?
The color map makes it easier to go back and recolor, so that you're not having to work with various shades of grey. If you work with completely different colors, then it's easier to see if there's anywhere that you've missed, or you make sure that you're working with the right shade, and then you go back and then you select the color and recolor that across the entire of the map.
Where do you create the layers for these colors? Is this something you do in Goxel?
No, that's done in GIMP, which is the program I use to create this. So I'll use a unique color per layer, so I'll start off at the base layer and build it up from there.
So I have an interesting... First of all, my first question was, what the fuck about the colors? But I get it now. Feels like you perfected the art of creating terrain in a texture. Like, I tried it and it's really hard. It's like everything I'm doing is coming out really, really flat. And what you did that's damn amazing, like the way you did it. So I'm very interested in the process or the way you're thinking when you're doing it in GIMP.
It's just one of those things that I've picked up along the years of working in GIMP. And I used to use GIMP way before I started mapping for Ace of Spades. So it's a program I've known for quite a while, and I know a lot of tips and tricks with it. I mean, I haven't used it for a while until I started mapping again for Ace of Spades, but it's one of those things that you always remember how to use it. And, it's just getting the balance of different colors, different shades of color, so you don't just want one blanket color for grass. You always have maybe a few highlights, just use a few grunge brushes to dot it about, blur, noise. It's just, you've got to get that balance right. And the good thing about image editing software is that you can see the changes in real time. So you can change the noise values, or you can change the blur values, and you can sort of perfect it in the preview window before you apply to the map.
So you start by layering the colors in GIMP, moving layer from bottom, going all the way up.
Yep.
And I think I saw in the coloring video that you sent, when I saw that you were highlighting certain areas to paint like the grass. So you basically just separate it into separate layers and then make the adjustments as needed.
Yeah, if it's a different shade of color or a different area, it goes on a new layer, and that way you can always adjust the opacity or the blur on just that area, and it gives you a bit more control rather than having to apply it across the entire image. Basically, you just duplicate the entire, all the layers visible, and then using the pick color tool, you then just pick each individual unique color and apply whatever height map layer color you want to it. I've got a little tool it's an image that I use. It's got all the different layers with all the corresponding height map colors. So if I want layer 0, I know I have to use this color. If I want layer 10, I know I have to use this color, sort of thing. So because I have to start off at layer 0 and build up from there,
Yeah, I was using the same, the grayscales letter you created.
Yeah.
I saw it in the guide you directed me to. I did that in Photoshop and it took quite some time, and I think I only did like 30 levels of height.
Yeah, well, there's 41, I think. I think once you've got around the artillery pit, that takes up to 40. The height of the mountains themselves is max 40. But I would say like this is probably one of the most in-depth height maps that I've had to make. It's probably one of the longest parts of the process as well, because it is repetitive. It is a bit mind-numbing. So you do a little bit and then you would have a break, or you shelve it for a few days, come back, do a little bit more.
Yeah, we guessed that this was the most time-intensive and grueling part of just getting the height correct and separating the layers and all that to just get it right.
Yeah.
And then you can move on to the more enjoyable bits, I assume.
Fun part, yeah.
Yeah.
I love when a height map, you first export the height map and the colour map and you get your very first result. That's really when you feel like the map's starting to take shape.
To ask, or just to cover potentially, is like, it's one thing to create like terrain using this method of layer by layer, going through, but how do you actually go about making it as realistic as possible? Because it's so easy to make sort of gently rolling hills, which are just blur pretty much from one color to another. But getting the inlets and making those feel natural, I presume there's some like natural laws almost that govern how you decide where to place certain things, whether that's erosion or...
Yeah, I mean, it's all handmade. Every voxel or every pixel in the image has been hand placed. It's nothing like any automated process. It's more just having appreciation for how land masses look, how the form sort of thing. So for example, you'd have rain falling onto the mountains theoretically, which would then carve channels into the mountains, which is why you get that wavy shape and you get channels which follow a certain line. It's not really something that you can teach someone to do. You've got to be able to visualize that in your own head. I don't know how I've managed to work out this process. It's just one of those things that I can look at something and say that landmass doesn't look quite natural. I'll tweak it a little bit, go back, and this iteration of the land map still got tweaked as I went through the map making process. So this isn't even the final iteration of the height map.
That's the thing I always said, I think even before we talked to you, we always said that in Flux's map, you have a sense of location. You really feel like you're there. And that was what convinced me that with just blocks and attention to detail, you can really create something that puts you there. And in Normandy, I felt the sense of location. I felt the World War II DNA built into the map. It was obvious for me from the first time I spawned there that this is a World War II map. And combined with the render distance and the fog and just the setting itself, fighting near a church, it's just, of course, the name gave it away, obviously, but it's just looking at the colors and seeing the level of detail on it, like you said, it just gives a sense of place and location that's really, to me, it was always like mind-blowing what you can get away with.
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to attention to detail. I'm a bit of a perfectionist myself, so if I don't think something's quite right, I can't leave it. It has to be resolved. So I think that's possibly one of the reasons why my maps have been quote unquote popular.
I mean, people feel it, even if they can't put their finger on it and go into the nitty-gritty details and hold through it and say, oh, this map feels realistic because of X, Y, and Z. Like you said, it's a kind of an instinct or sort of thing that can happen.
Yeah.
It's the clock on the side of the terraced housing in Flood Waters that does it for me. I remember not understanding what I was looking at when I was inside the building, and then later, I don't know whether it was being told by you or just eventually figuring out actually what was on the outside the building as to why this certain apparatus was inside.
I like putting things like that into maps because in my mind, when a building gets destroyed or something, it then reveals this little hidden detail that nobody would have known about.
Yeah.
It just shows you what attention of detail you go through, and it's impressive. I love it. I think here there's a good reference that you showed with the fields.
Yeah, so when I get a reference image, I try to sort of use that as heavily as possible. And that's possibly also why my maps have this realistic feel, is because I use reference images, always have done, whether it be from real life experience or from online images.
Also seeing you use actual photos to dip the colors and paint the river.
Yeah, and I think that also helps, what's the point in using a reference image if you don't steal the color from it as well? Because
Sure.
Why guess when the colour's there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Doing the colour map is a lot simpler than doing the height map. I think I did the colour map over the course of a few hours, whereas the height map, I think that took a few weeks to reach the end of the height map process. I mean, that's not fully working on it all the time because, like I said, it's pretty mind-numbing. In Goxel, it's also quite handy because you can paint in Goxel and you can set alpha and that sort of stuff, so that's also been really helpful in tweaking the terrain. I probably wouldn't use it for a full-on colour map, but where you need to modify colour maps, even in quite large areas, it's a pretty powerful tool.
Yeah, I think that the thing that I noticed with the painting, I don't know, I think you did the roads not in Goxel, right?
Yeah, the main roads, but then like on the bridge with the tyre tracks on the bridge in the later version of the map, that was done in Goxel. All the rocky cliff faces was done in Goxel.
And the other thing that took me a while to figure out, I don't think I did figure it out, is how you do the spread of the tracks coloring.
Just a lighter colour, so just using the pencil tool, that would draw the line and then apply blur and noise to it.
So your question is like, how does he maintain the...
No, it's both. It's an art to create a realistic feeling effect. You can see in here it does feel like the tracks are really consistent.
Yeah, I mean, it's consistent and changes a little bit, which is, I think, adds to it in a way, because it makes it look a bit more organic, and in general, just the noise patterns. And I see that already in like version 2.1, you started adding the props.
Yeah, that was just to start to get a feel of the scale of everything. Yeah, like, example, that Huey, I really enjoyed making the Huey prop.
Because I understand you just use the standard scale that 3 voxels is a soldier.
I think I did go back and revise the Huey a little bit because it sort of felt a bit too tall. Because if you think head height is like 2 blocks, if you like 2 blocks is sort of up to your chest. So I didn't want players to be standing next to the Huey and the chairs to be at the head height, which wouldn't feel true to scale to a Huey. So I think I made it so that the skids are down on the ground, so the Huey sort of sat on the ground. It's not lifted up off the ground on the skids in a later version.
Makes sense. I think my favorite addition was just the road, because it took me a while to notice it. It was like a hidden detail.
You know, as you can see there, you can see that the road is quite a wide, shallowly rising area compared to the mountain itself, which the height gradients are a lot more closely spaced.
So yeah, I started creating the props, added the howitzer cannons, and here we showed the diorama, which I thought was brilliant. Such a good reference.
Also pretty good diorama as well.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I love it. I love it. And you did do a few Hueys, one with like the 45-degree angle ones.
I thought if the blades were in line with the Huey or if they were perpendicular to the Huey, it didn't look quite right on the overhead map. So I thought the 45-degree blades was like the perfect mix of both.
So then you started moving towards making tunnels. I don't want to show too much of these because I do want players to discover where they are, but I do want to show this one. You did this with the first-person camera, right? The Grandy added to Goxel to be able to sculpt out these areas. Mind just explaining how different the process is for creating the cave systems?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first-person camera is a godsend, the addition that Grandy added, because on a previous map that I made for Grandy, which is called Butte, that had a tunnel system in it, but we didn't have the first-person camera, and that was a pain to try and model, because you couldn't really look underneath the terrain, or whereas the first-person camera, you could sort of sculpt an area out, tweak it, put in the finer details like the stalactites and stuff like that, and then you could go in and color it as well. So the coloring process was a lot easier in first person as well.
So these are one of the references we saw for, I mean, we can't show this because these are just references. Do you ever design a map with like these kind of claustrophobic tunnel systems, and was it a challenge to design these?
Not really. I mean, once I'd done the cave system, this was sort of a bit of an easier because it's just a narrow tunnel. The hardest part was because I've never really designed a tunnel system before, like player-built tunnel system or a human tunnel system like the Viet Cong had. So I needed a lot of reference images because the Vietnam War is not something I'm really that familiar with. So it was interesting to try and see something on these reference images like that, the well, or, you know, the sleeping hammocks and stuff like that, and try and translate those into a voxel environment. It was a challenge, but it was a fun challenge.
Especially in a game where digging is supposed to take center stage.
Yeah.
Which is why I was a bit conflicted about it at the beginning, because I thought to myself, do we really want to add the tunnels beforehand? And I'm like, yeah, if you want the thematic experience of it, it's still not digging enough tunnels to justify not digging at all.
Because players will still be able to dig or build, fortifications out in the field as well. That doesn't have to be centered around the spawn areas.
Which is just a good way, I think, of, introducing the location and then just adding to it. So after you were done with the Ripcord US phase, you started moving to the VC village.
Yep.
So essentially, it was just adding the huts and, of course, the big surprise that's waiting there. I just don't want to show too much of it. And then the final thing was starting to add the foliage. And how difficult was it to make the trees and forests?
Making the trees and forests, each individual model, wasn't difficult at all. The difficult part was getting it looking correct. So inserting the right amount of each kind of tree, getting them enough variation with the rotations and the heights of the trees to make them look natural, and the sheer amount of trees as well. That was also quite a big thing.
But at the beginning, we had a small discussion, a technical one, where we suggested the fact that we were considering adding more subdivisions to make the trees be more realistic. But I gotta tell you that even without it, the work that you've done on these trees is so convincing that for me it settled the debate once and for all that there's no need for additional subdivisions.
Yep.
I mean, it's a nice to have feature, but just seeing this frame right now.
Like sometimes I'll just get lost in looking at it from different angles and just admiring how it looked. I like the way that the trees rise with the mountain.
These trees are so close together because we do want to eventually, a voxel is detached from the ground, it'll collapse. But because these trees are so close and sometimes even interconnected, I think that just clearing the forests will be a lot more difficult in a location like this, which I'm hoping will cause Vietcong players to just climb up the trees and do the
tree snipers.
Yeah, and just go on the trees instead of taking the time to remove them.
It's sort of not entirely. I mean, I do, from the experience that I've got of making maps, I know that dense trees do tend to stick together, but I just really wanted to have a dense, oppressive jungle area where it was difficult to navigate through. You didn't have very good sight lines and that sort of stuff. So I think that's just a natural consequence of having such densely packed foliage.
When you say sightlines, this is something that goes into any multiplayer or even single-player shooting map design. When you take sightlines into consideration, not even knowing, when we told you vaguely what the render distance is going to be based on previous tests that we had.
Yeah.
But when you design sightlines, is there a particular way that you approach it?
Not really, because my feeling is that in real life, it's not a design map, so therefore sightlines, you could get advantageous areas with good sightlines, you could get areas with bad sightlines, and I generally try to make my maps feel realistic. When it came to doing the undergrowth, I sort of considered the sightlines a little bit there, because once you get down below the tree canopy, it's quite bare and it's quite open. I got down in there and I sort of had a look to see where you could take cover, like how far you can see, that sort of stuff. But in the open areas and on the mountaintops, in my eyes, that's an open area, so the sightlines should just be whatever they turn out to be. You need to strike a balance between realism and gameplay, but that's the approach that I've always taken in my maps, is that until I started making the small 2v2 maps with Grandy, I'd never really considered sightlines. I'd always just made a map that I thought accurately felt like a battlefield or an area where a battle could take place, and just let the players work it out themselves. Essentially, with a destructible or buildable terrain, it can change. You could design the best sightlines in the world, and players could come along and destroy it, or just build a little fort and completely change the way the map plays.
Yeah, which I think is the highlight of this genre of particular shooter. Being able to be a bit more loose with map designs, choosing a location. For example, one of the locations that I would love to do is Hamburger Hill, when you can be more flexible with the game type, that you can just change the terrain, like you say, build a fort and change it. It gives you, I think, as a map designer, a bit more freedom to just say, yeah, this is the map. Yeah, you might have a bit more disadvantage in one part or the other, but you can change.
I think we had a discussion about this specific subject, because in this genre where you can destroy and build whatever you want in the map, it's from one side what you're saying is true, is you have more freedom, but on the other side you can't restrict the player to move in certain corridors or areas or whatever that you want to have a strategic value. because you can do whatever roads you want. You can just go ahead and walk through those trees and the mountain and dig and whatever, build bridges.
I think probably the best example of that is the old map Hallway from the old Ace of Spades. You know, without building or destruction, everyone would just be funneled down a narrow corridor, and it wouldn't make for a very good map. The fun in that map sort of stems from the fact that you can build up to the top, you can dig whatever tunnels you go through, and it's like once the map's been played on for a while, there's just a crisscross of tunnels and blocks and forts, and that's really, you know, epitomizes the benefits of a destructible map terrain.
Point that I saw that you were having to painstakingly go through was the mountains. You told us that you ran into a bit of an issue when you started adding the trees over there. There's something that didn't sit right with you.
I think when I'd done the colour map, I hadn't really put that much consideration into the mountains. I hadn't looked at the reference images in depth, and that really come back to bite me when I started putting the prefabs in. So I had to sort of modify the colour map in Goxel, because by then I'd already done the tunnels and cave systems, so I couldn't regenerate the height map with the colour map because I would have lost all of that progress. So I had to sort of paint the terrain, add some foliage and that sort of stuff in Goxel, and I think the end result actually turned out pretty well. I'm happy with the result.
What I'm looking at here is before, it was like in the middle of the change, right?
Yeah, before it was put the prefabs on, and I was not really happy with how it looked. Especially on the overhead map, it looked like someone had just taken a load of prefabs and just scattered them haphazardly across.
Yeah, it felt a bit disconnected. I mean, here it's without the forest itself, it's just the undergrowth, and then we have the forest up here, like the trees.
Yeah.
And it created a bit of a visual dissonance, I'd say. And so you managed to solve it, if I saw correctly. You basically cut this area out, singled it out, recolored it, and then re-implemented it back into the map.
Yeah, it was a lot of effort, but it was worth it in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have some of the shots you sent us. So yeah, you cut around it and then you just recolored it.
Yeah, the reason I had to do that is because painting inside of Goxel on a full map is extremely slow. So I had to try and trim as many voxels as possible out of it so that I could paint it at a decent rate.
I think it's a good thing for us to document and understand the process, because we have been talking about the map editor for a long while. Of course, we'll be focusing on gameplay on the next year, but it is important, I think, for you as well, AMN, to understand. We started making our own map as well, understanding where the limitations of Goxels are, and of course, you guys, Grandy and folks already talked to us, shared all the gripes that you have with the process and having to jump between different software, and hopefully we'll be able to one day coalesce it into a single unified experience. So if you had to make changes like this, it could hopefully be isolated and easier to do.
I mean, if your map editor sort of is a one-stop shop for everything, that would be ideal.
That's the dream, I mean, or the idea at least.
And it brings us to the final result, and I think it turned out to be a brilliant map. Just the sense of location, how you can compress into 512 pixels, how what Vietnam, or this very particular slice of Vietnam will feel like, and I think you absolutely nailed it.
Thank you very much.
Things that I do enjoy about older first-person shooter games is the scale of maps. I mean, we all play together Hell Let Loose, and while I did enjoy talking with you, I felt that most of the time I was either running towards you, walking and trying to find you guys.
The walking simulator. If you go off one voxel being 0.6 meters or 600 millimeters, a map is only 300 meters square.
If you factor in the digging, the way that terrain works, and the amount of paths you can take, it of course adds the complexity to it. But when you don't see the render distance, it almost feels like a diorama. You know what I mean? I always love the Ace of Spades map size.
I can tell you that even in Ace of Spades, I would walk, I would die, I would spawn and just need to walk like a minute or two to get where I was, and then I would immediately get shot by either orca or tank. Yeah, tank. I never tank.
Still waking up in the middle of the night, sweating, having to know that I'm gonna lose in my own game to this man.
I think Tank is the only one who made me rage quit Ace of Spades.
Well, it's fair. He's mental. The guy is so good. So yeah, I think with these, just putting it back to the map design and the way, the sense of location and feeling, and just taking all the aspects and combine it to it. And I think you said it in the message that you're happy with the result. You're just hoping it'll be a good map. So I'm assuming that you mean it'll be fun to play on, right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to give it a play test before it gets released to the wider audience, but
yeah, it was just awesome to see you go through the process. It was just fascinating for us to see it.
I have to say this map is probably the most amount of effort I've put into a map.
It feels like I'm appreciated.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm glad that the effort shows.
It absolutely does, and I'm sure players will feel it as well. But I have absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, it was so good that it made us just open Goxel and say, yeah, we're gonna do that. We have to try making a map as well. But yeah, if you can see here on the process now that you can see it from beginning to end, I think it's I've cut some of the intermediate parts. Yeah, I just exported the top level, the top image from Goxel from the versions we got. But as you can see, from sketch to finish,
it looks good.
I think it's really brilliant work, man. Really appreciate it. It's been beautiful to watch the process.
Yeah, I like watching videos like this. I made one for one of my old maps, Market Garden, and it's great to see it go from that initial concept to the finished state.
It's something even for games, just in general, working on games, you see something very similar to it. But when it's a map and it's sketched out and you keep the proportions as is and you can actually document the process and see how it all turns out, I think it's just... and of course, I think we'll probably, after play testing and whatnot, make minor changes here and there.
Yeah, this I fully expect there'll be some modifications to be made.
But I think with experience and moving on to other maps will be a fun process, and I think we also learn a lot from it. For me, getting you the references and just putting it all together, and I'm hoping we're easy customers.
When I was sending you stuff and saying oh, what do you think of this? It was always just looks brilliant. Yep, happy with that.
Yeah, it's better than what I imagined in general, not because of the influx, just in general, the way I imagined. Not even this, even before the sketch. I think we just got the sketch, and I'm it's gonna be a good map. It doesn't matter what he does, it's gonna be a good map for me in my head, because I just played around with Goxel. We looked at other maps, started to think how it's gonna look. I was worried up until you made this map. I was really concerned about the Vietnam look. Really, the trees, foliage, undergrowth, the rice fields, all the things that in our heads, which is why we had the discussion of the additional subdivisions for voxels, because it was that worrisome for us. It's how, and I think I'll show the picture. We have the wallpaper that you asked us about, what's with the trees? You have the grunt and the trees in the back. What is that? It has tinier voxels, and we played around with it because we were experimenting with different methods.
That's the horrible thing I did in Maya.
Well,
it looks quite good, to be fair.
It does the job and it delivers, but I think that you proved that with a talented enough map designer and a person who can actually deliver on these kind of looks and have the patience to go from Goxel and make the assets, this map, I think we're all set for other maps.
I think we can say you sort of set the tone for the map, so it was good to just let you do your process and see what you do. It showed us what the theme that we were talking about, and you just, oh god, he's right, that's way better than what I had in my head, because I had nothing in my head.
No, I think we just imagined the trees, and we started doing different trees, and we're playing around with it, and it just didn't gel in the same way that it did here.
And you proved in this map how it could be.
Absolutely.
It's one of those things, it's reference images. I just looked after reference image, because I'm so much of a perfectionist that it needed to be trees that did actually exist in Vietnam. So I had to spend time researching what trees were in Vietnam, what trees were in different terrains in Vietnam, what trees were in the jungle in Vietnam and on the mountains and all that sort of stuff. And then from there, it's reference images and just, creating 2 or 3 variants, rotation, and 1 or 2 variants and a bit of rotations can sort of hide how many trees you've actually created.
I was playing with my head, eventually in the future, if I was I want to give you some time off to rest, and not immediately, all right, so here's the next map. Yeah. But if I had to just think about it and say, I'd rather the next map or the location will be something different. It can still be Vietnam, but not it should be a different slice of Vietnam that comes with its own.
If you did want us to make another map, I wouldn't just do Boonies 2.0. I would want it to be, because with all the maps that I've created, a lot of them have been completely different settings. I've went, Normandy, I've went to the desert, an industrial complex, that sort of stuff. So I like to try and challenge myself and do terrains that I haven't really done before. Vietnam was a very interesting terrain to try and model, especially trying to put that much foliage into the voxel resolution that you have, because Vietnam is a very, especially the rainforests are a very heavily foliage. There's rocks, there's small bushes, there's big trees, that sort of stuff. It's how to translate that into the voxel environment. But now that it's being done, I would look to do a completely different, maybe a hill in the middle and the players fight over it rather than a spawn on a hill each, that sort of thing.
Of course, which makes sense. I think, like in my head, I had just doing Tet Offensive, for example, going completely urban on a very famous Fall of Saigon. You have such...
Yeah. Or Ho Chi Minh Trail, where it's just complete jungle.
Absolutely. So I think we are absolutely not lacking in different unique locations for Born to Build, but of course we don't want to exhaust the resources and immediately jump to other maps. I think that's more than enough for us for testing the initial game. We'll have our map for doing like the shooting range and the other mechanics, and the player map for this.
Yeah, and especially if you're going to go back and add foliage blocks.
Yeah, so I think for us it'll be a very good jumping off point, and just hopefully when this devlog goes up, it'll be already with in-engine.
Yeah, you're hearing us in a very crucial point in the development.
Very much so, and I think it intersects in a very, like you said, a very critical moment for us, because I think we would have been bummed out if we would have reached gameplay just using, we love Normandy and other maps, so we really wanted something that will stand out, and I think you absolutely knocked it out of the park, man. I just can't even emphasize that enough.
Thank you very much.
So thanks again for your time.
Yeah, thanks for yours as well.
And the map itself. We'll be in touch soon, man.
All right. Thank you very much.
Good night, man.